I'm here with Anya Kamenetz, and she's the author of a couple of books, Generation Debt, DIYU, and the Coming Transformation of Higher Education. And she's a writer for Fast Company, a columnist for Tribune, and her writing appears everywhere. I won't list them all, New York Times, Washington Post, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for talking about a range of subjects today.
Thanks, Skip.
So your first book, Generation Debt, it came out in 2006, and it came out really long before debt was talked about from a student perspective. And now it seems like it's everywhere. In fact, President Obama in the State of the Union address is talking about debt. What got you interested in that topic so early? I mean, way before it was mainstream.
I hesitate to say that it was luck, but it was definitely the product of a young reporter looking for a beat to call my own. And I was very lucky to have some great mentors at the Village Voice who kind of said, hey, go out and get this story. We know that people your age are really struggling, and there's an economic story that's remaining to be told here. We're used to hearing about it from the cultural side, so why don't you go check that out, Anya? And very, very quickly it turned into the book, and then, the phenomenon that it is today.
That's interesting. Well, in Generation Debt, you mentioned that, let me get this right, only 46% of men and 31% of women in 2000 can be considered grown-up.
Right.
But if you go back to 1960, those numbers were 65% of men and 77% of women. You can look and you can see, many would have kids or mortgage, et cetera.
Right.
So why is that? Is that student debt, or what is the reason for that shift?
Well, there's a lot of factors at work there. I mean, emerging adulthood has been proposed by Jeffrey Jensen Arnett, the sociologist, as being a new stage of life that people are in. And part of that is the extension of education, the requirement of so many more years of education needed to get out there in the world. Part of that is the high cost of that education that we can see leads people to be more wary of establishing their own households, of often the times they can't buy a home. And then all of that adds up to a cultural factor, I think, as well, where you're not so willing to go out on your own and create that lasting partnership or start a family because your life does feel so temporary. You don't have the establishment in your career, you're not feeling financially independent, and I think that leads to a lot of extended dependence in a lot of ways.
Extended dependence. When you think about generation debt, you also say that it's as much about the higher costs of education as it is about higher amounts of debt that they have. Have you seen a greater interest with young people in interest in the financial aspects of all of this and the payback than when you started, or is it about the same?
Oh, I think that there's been a huge change there. Everything from there's been legislative changes like the Card Act, making it less likely for college students to get into credit card debt. And I think on a macro level, you see young people who have lived through the financial crisis in 2008, and it was really chastening for a lot of people. A lot of people have seen that economic, time of real fear and instability, and I think that's a type of thing that impacts you for a lifetime. I mean, you start looking at, people's willingness to save more, to be more cautious about debt, to be interested in investing. I see all of that in millennials.
Let's shift a bit to your other book,
yeah.
DIYU, Do-It-Yourself University. When you think about that, one of the things that you say in that is you say that the belief in the universal power of higher education is the closest thing to a world religion that we have today. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, so in Generation Debt, I was talking about the cost of college, and that naturally led me to kind of ask the question, well, why is it that so many people are willing to pay so much for higher education? And so in DIYU, I really delved into the history of higher education. And, the world religion line, it really comes from John Mayer, who is a really eminent sociologist of higher education. And he said, you might not know this, but you're a rationalist and I'm a rationalist. And the modern religion is basically rationalism. And the university is the cathedral of rationalism. It's the temple, the place that we go to acquire this esoteric ability to sort of take the world around us and transform it according to universal laws and have control over nature and, to have the tools of science. And all of these things are so wonderful, but the problem is that the university becomes the source of expertise and the gatekeeper and the only way that people can have any hope of being successful in life. And because of that status, they're able to basically charge whatever they want for the privilege.
In the same book, Do-It-Yourself University, give me an example of something that you find very compelling from that book.
Yeah, so DIYU is really about the emergence of peer learning and internet-enabled networked learning where people are getting together not only to learn from each other but also to demonstrate their knowledge. And I think a really exciting example of this is the maker movement, the growth of 3D printing, and the fact that, maker movement is about two things. The offline part of it is designing things and printing them and making them in your own garage, and then the online part of it is sharing those designs, creating step-by-step instructional videos and commenting on other people and downloading other people's designs. And so in this sort of like very peer-to-peer YouTube enabled kind of world, instead of having to just deal with whatever designs a large corporation wants you to use for your own life, you can actually get something from someone else and you can learn how to do it yourself. And that is what people find so empowering. It's leading many people to start businesses and to remake their careers. And I think it's all through the power of not only technology but very much peer-to-peer relationships.
Well, we've talked about generation debt. We talked about DIYU.
Yeah.
We just had a robust panel on the future of MOOCs and online education and all of that. What are you working on right now?
Well, glad that you asked. I wanted to write about K-12 education and all the exciting things happening there because I just had a daughter myself and I'm curious to know what's going on. But I found that when talking about what's happening in public education, something that's inescapable, the elephant in the room, is really the standardized testing regime that's out there, and that has sort of become the measurement of success or failure in our public schools. And so my new book is called The Test, and it's all about how we measure and how we manage what we measure and what metrics are we using, and is data and data-driven accountability really all it's cracked up to be? Is it possible to institute different measurements of value that really get at what we'd most like to see our kids doing in school and the kind of society we'd like to build?
One last question. All this education, all the things that we're doing for the next generation, you're concerned about debt levels, do it yourself. As you think about future leaders, do you have concerns? Do you have hope? What's your view of future leaders? You said you have a child now. What's your hope in future leaders and how they develop?
Well, I guess a major thrust of a lot of things that I'm talking about are, we see the failure of institutions, but we also see individual and collective resilience. And the opportunity that's afforded to the millennial generation and the generation after us is to really seize control and create our own futures and tell our own stories. And I think the most successful members of these generations are the ones that are really able to do that because they're empowered, because they have a sense of agency, but also because they have a sense of possibility and optimism. And no matter, what gets them down, whether it be economic collapse or debt, you do see this incredible resilience in young people, and that's what I really pin my hopes on.
Resiliency, seizing control, and making it happen.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much,
Appreciate you
Skip.
talking about